In the last few videos, we talked about how to manage and organize all of your everyday supplies. In this module, we're going to be talking about how to organize your more complex media, such as your painting, ceramic, printmaking, and weaving supplies. We're going to start this video by talking about how to organize your painting supplies. So there is a great downloadable resource that gives a bunch of tips for how to organize your paint. Some of my favorites are if you use the gallon paints and put the pumps on them, you can put a pipe cleaner in that pump to prevent clogging, or to remove clogs. If you soak them upside down in warm water, that'll help take that clog right out. So I like to have paint trays ready to go for my students. So I keep these at the table stations where my students can find all of their common supplies. And on the paint tray, I'll have 2 cups of water that are always filled and ready to go, as well as a ice cube tray that has tempera paint already in it. If you don't already have an ice cube tray with a lid on it, it is a great thing to invest in because it keeps your paints from drying out. The best part about these ice cube trays is that they're silicone at the bottom, so that way when they dry out, or if you need to clean them out and refill with new paint, just let them completely dry out and then just pop the old paint right out and you can refill them without having to totally rinse them out. In lieu of using water cups, you could get some dog food bowls from a discount store, and on one side you can fill it with water, on the other side you can put a sponge for students to wipe their brush, and that way not only does it keep your brushes nice and clean from that sponge, but it prevents spills because the dog food bowl can't really knock over. When it comes to organizing your paint brushes, I like to keep my nicer brushes that are already color coordinated in their own separate containers, but you might also have some brushes that were a part of paint sets that maybe aren't your best brushes, so I like to organize these by size. So I have a small, medium, and large container, and it's really easy to just pull these containers out for my students to pick their own brush when we're ready to use them. Another way you can keep your brushes organized, if you want to sort them by color but your brushes aren't actually colored, if you just put colored tape on the end and maybe your cup has that color on it, then students can easily just put it back in that right color. When it comes to distributing my tempera paint, I can do this in a couple different ways. So I do like to have that ice cube tray full of paint ready to go, but if I need a little bit more of each paint and I can use one of these larger paint palettes to pour larger amounts of paint, you can cover these to keep them nice and neat for a few weeks without them drying out. I like to just take another one and just flip it over and use it as a lid. But another way you could do it is if you cover it with something like a plastic wrap. When it comes to pouring my tempera paint, I can do this in a few different ways. I do like to have these large gallons where students can actually pump their own paint into their trays. I'll let my older students do that, but my younger students, I'll do that for them. But what's nice about the older students is that you can tell them how many pumps to actually put into their container, so that way they're not overflowing it. You can also have quart-size bottles ready to go, or if you save condiment containers from ketchup or mustard, wherever you can easily just squeeze paint out, that would be great for distributing your tempera paint as well. Another way that I like to distribute tempera paint is if I have these quart-sized bottles, so it's a lot easier to just squeeze the paint out instead of pumping it so many times. If you don't have quart-sized bottles, you can save condiment bottles, so from ketchup or mustard, any squeezable bottle will be easy to fill with paint and to use in the same system. When you use tempera cakes with your students, these are great because as you run out, it's really easy to just replenish them by putting one back right in the space. A little trick is if you have a spray bottle with these, you can easily spray them to get them all hydrated and ready for your classes, so your students can use them a little quicker. Another type of paint you will probably be using with your students are watercolors, and there are a few different kinds of watercolors to keep in mind. So The most common is using the tray of watercolors, and what's great about these is that they're really easy to distribute. Your students can even pick up their own palette to have as their own instead of sharing at their table. It's really important as we use these that once students are done using them to keep the lids open so that way these don't get all gooey and sticky for the next group. Another little trick is to keep the lid actually off of the set, and so that way your students can't close it and they have to dry out. Another great thing about watercolor sets is that when a color runs out, you can just take the pan right out and replace it with another individual pan, so you don't have to keep replacing the entire set every time that a color runs out. I like to keep all of my extra pans in an organized container that organizes all of them by color, and it's really easy for students to see if they need a color, they can just go ahead and grab it and refill as needed. Another type of watercolor you might be using with your students are liquid watercolors, and these can be a little tricky because they are very messy if they spill and do have a tendency to stain. So I like to keep them in baby food jars. That way they're sealed and contained, and if they spill, usually it won't leak out of the jar. Another way that you can distribute liquid watercolors is by using these plastic trays again. And similar to the tempera paint is if you pour the watercolors in here, you can just cover it with another lid or use a plastic wrap to keep them fresh for other classes. One tricky thing about liquid watercolors is that, especially the dark colors, it's kind of hard to tell which color is which. They're all so dark and concentrated. So if you can get a cupcake liner that's silicone that shows those colors and put them in the trays first and then pour your liquid watercolors in, your students will be able to easily identify which color is which. Now, when it comes to actually distributing my liquid watercolors, I am the one that passes those out because they have a tendency to spill really easily. They're just so watery in the trays, and I don't want any students to get watercolors on them or to spill and make a huge mess. And especially if I have all of these little jars, I don't want them falling and breaking on the floor. So I'm the one that will distribute those paints. It takes a little extra time, but that way everything stays clean and we don't have any spills in the classroom. When it's time to clean up the painting supplies, I do keep a bucket near the sink so that way students can just put all of their paintbrushes in that bucket. And that bucket's filled a little bit with some warm water so the paintbrushes can soak a little bit and actually take some of that paint off. By the time I'm ready to clean out those brushes, a lot of the paint has already exited the brush and it's pretty easy for me to clean. My students can also clean up those brushes if they have a little bit of extra time and are looking for a job to do. When it comes to putting artwork on the drying rack, I like to keep a little teacher tag by the student's artwork. So this is our class code for one of my classes, and if you just hook this on the drying rack and students can see, they'll load the drying rack in that same spot, so all of your artwork for that class will stay organized. If you don't want to do tags, you can also organize your drying rack by putting little colored tape on all of the metal shelves. And so you can say, students, go find the red drying rack shelves, and they can put all of their artwork in there, and they'll know that that's their class, and the orange colored tape or another color would be a different class. We've just gone through how to organize all of your various painting supplies. In the next video, we're going to be talking about organizing your ceramic materials.